At a glance, it looks like nothing more than a simple design choice. Rows of evenly spaced boards, each topped with a neat little point. But that small detail has a purpose most people never stop to question, quietly carrying a story that goes far beyond decoration. Those pointed tips weren't just added to make fences look complete. So why do picket fences have pointed tips, and what were they actually designed to do in the first place? They hint at something more practical, something rooted in how people once protected what mattered to them. And once you notice it, it's hard to unsee just how intentional that shape really is. Let's uncover it right here on History of Simple Things. At its core, a fence exists to define space and create a boundary, whether that's to keep something in or to keep something out. Early fences, long before the familiar suburban picket style, were built with one goal in mind: protection. Farmers needed to keep livestock from wandering, and homeowners needed to discourage trespassers. A flat-topped fence would technically do the job, but it left an opportunity for climbing. By shaping the tops into points, builders made fences more difficult and uncomfortable to scale. The pointed tips act as a passive deterrent, not necessarily injuring someone, but making the act of climbing awkward enough to discourage it. This idea, designing something simple that subtly prevents unwanted behavior, has been part of fence construction for centuries. The pointed fence design traces back to much older defensive structures, especially in medieval Europe. Wooden palisades, which were used to protect villages and forts, often featured sharpened stakes driven into the ground with their tips facing upward. These weren't just symbolic barriers, they were meant to slow down or stop intruders. While modern picket fences are far less aggressive, they borrow this same visual language. The pointed tops are essentially a softened version of those defensive stakes, adapted for residential use. Over time, the sharpness became less about actual defense and more about preserving the idea of a boundary that shouldn't be crossed easily. Even in a peaceful suburban setting, that historical influence still lingers in the design. Beyond discouraging climbing, pointed tips also serve a practical purpose when it comes to durability. A flat-topped piece of wood tends to collect water when it rains, allowing moisture to sit and slowly seep into the material. Over time, this leads to rot, warping, and structural weakening. By shaping the top into a point, water naturally runs off instead of pooling. This simple adjustment helps extend the life of the fence without requiring additional materials or maintenance. It's a small design choice with a significant long-term benefit, especially in climates with frequent rainfall. In this sense, the pointed tip is not just about appearance or security, it's also about preserving the structure itself. As picket fences became more common, especially in 18th and 19th century America, they started to take on symbolic meaning. A picket fence wasn't just a barrier, it became a representation of order, property ownership, and a well-maintained home. The pointed tops contributed to this image by giving the fence a sense of precision and intention. Unlike rough or irregular barriers, evenly spaced pointed pickets suggested care and craftsmanship. They communicated that the homeowner valued both structure and aesthetics. Over time, this evolved into a cultural symbol, where the picket fence came to represent an idealized version of domestic life, organized, secure, and clearly defined. As industrialization progressed, the production of building materials became more standardized, and picket fences were no exception. Manufacturers began producing pre-cut pickets in consistent shapes, with pointed or rounded tops becoming the most common options. The pointed design remained popular because it balanced function and appearance. It was easy to produce using simple cutting techniques, and it maintained the traditional look people had come to expect. Even as alternative designs became available, the pointed picket remained a default choice. This standardization helped reinforce the design across different regions, making it a familiar and recognizable feature in many neighborhoods. Today, the pointed picket fence is often chosen more for its aesthetic appeal than for any practical need for defense. Modern homes rarely rely on fences for serious security, yet the design persists. The pointed tips create a rhythm and visual flow that flat edges don't quite achieve. They add character without overwhelming the simplicity of the fence. At the same time, they connect modern homes to a long tradition of architectural design. Even when made from materials like vinyl or metal instead of wood, the pointed shape is often preserved. It's a case where a functional feature has evolved into a stylistic choice, but one that still carries echoes of its original purpose. It's easy to overlook something as ordinary as the top of a fence, especially when it blends so naturally into the background of everyday life. But the pointed picket is a reminder that even the simplest designs are shaped by real needs, decisions, and moments in history. What began as a quiet form of protection, subtle, practical, and intentional, gradually softened into something familiar and even comforting. The edge that once discouraged intrusion now helps define the image of a peaceful home. So the next time you see a picket fence, those small pointed tips aren't just finishing touches. They're a quiet example of how function turns into tradition, and how tradition over time becomes something we rarely question but always recognize. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.